Um, Venerable Chodron has returned from Taiwan. She's doing pretty well. It was a long trip, and her time zone is really way off. So she's actually, she's wishing she could be here, but wasn't able to. So she'll be back next week. She's probably half asleep, and her voice probably wouldn't work. So, but she says hello to everyone. Wishes you all well. So we're going to continue tonight with teachings that are in line with what we've been studying in mind trading, like Rays of the Sun, where we've been focusing a lot lately on the self-centered thought. And so we'll start first by just sitting together for a minute or two, and then I'll set a motivation, and then we'll have the teaching. So let's just join each other in meditation for a couple of minutes. So by way of motivation, I think that many people here and anyone listening have heard Venerable Chodron teach for many years. But even if you're new, it's very, very common for her to help us to recognize the self-centered thought. And when self-concern is kind of dominating our attitudes and our leading to actions that where we just create negative karma. And so as we look into these teachings tonight, just having an appreciation for how hard she's worked to try to help us. Since beginningless time, we're kind of dominated by certain kind of active ignorance, and its ally, this just relentless concern for the self that defies all reason. So let's just really rejoice that we have the opportunity to learn methods from our great teachers and from the lineage that comes all the way from the Buddha about how to work with these states of mind and how to really eliminate them, first more conventionally and then ultimately. As we do this, we'll just be of greater and greater benefit to everyone that we're around. And so as we listen tonight and join each other in this endeavor, let's think about our long-term goal, which is really wishing to have every creature free of every suffering and to become enlightened in order to bring that to fruition. So with a little help from my friends, tonight we're going to focus on 9 and 5. 9 points related to a certain kind of equanimity, and then 5 kind of decisions that we try to enhance in our minds that come from this. And I was trying to figure out why I wanted to do this topic. I guess that it comes from this place of the motivation that's been really beneficial for me for some time now has been to recognize, like we are taught in the Shakyamuni Buddha practice, that we sentient beings lack love, compassion, and joy. And that I think about that numerous times every day in a way that's actually been very helpful for my mind. I'm kind of wondering how to get to the love part. So this talk tonight really helps us to go in that direction. So it starts with looking at equanimity. And in the Buddhist tradition, there are different types of equanimity. They apply to different situations. In this context, really what we're doing is we're looking at our purpose. We want to become, we're making this strong aspiration to become bodhisattvas. So we have to generate bodhicitta, this awakening mind, this mind that wants to become enlightened in order to relieve all suffering. But that's actually not enough. We have to become familiar with it and apply it in all aspects of our lives. So that's kind of where this fits in. There's like on the cushion and off the cushion. So when we're on the cushion, in this method that we're working with tonight, we're going to lead ourselves to the point of doing the meditations on exchanging, equalizing, exchanging self and others. And then off the cushion, you work on transforming various unfavorable conditions and circumstances into the path to enlightenment. So both ways you're headed towards enlightenment and you're trying to benefit others. In the mind training like Rays of the Sun, we actually haven't gotten yet to the point on transforming adverse circumstances into the path. But we have spent a fair amount of time on the 7-point cause and effect. And that's one method to generate conventional bodhicitta. And what we're going to talk about tonight is all from the perspective of the second method, which is more what we have from Shantideva. And so, when I first formally became a Buddhist, there was a verse that always threw me a little bit. I was just so surprised to read it. And it's very similar to this verse about from the 37 practices, which is, all suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. Perfect Buddhas are born from the thought to help others. Therefore, exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. And that first line, that idea was like so foreign to me. All suffering comes from the wish for your own happiness. It just seems so counterintuitive. And so we spend a lot of time kind of swimming upstream and learning to see how that actually plays out in our lives. And so I think my first thought for tonight was to look into the advantages of cherishing others and the disadvantages of self-centeredness. And it really comes from this idea. This is what it boils down to, is, of course, we don't want to suffer, but seeing that a wish for our own happiness is what's driving this so much is it's just so pervasive, and it's so counterintuitive to the self-centered thought. So when we were studying in the 7-point cause and effect method, that kind of equanimity is a little more restricted in a sense. That's where you're leveling out attachment, anger, and like apathy, because you've kind of labeled everyone friend, enemy, and stranger, and so they're just like, there's me and there's them. And I'm just putting them in, discriminating them into these categories. And so that, the equanimity meditation that you do before the 7-point cause and effect is for that purpose, where we aren't just holding some people close and other people distant and trying to smooth that out and see it for what it is. But it's still got this aspect of there's me and them. The equanimity, and that actually, that kind of equanimity is found in the Theravada tradition. But this equanimity that we do with the equalizing and exchanging self for others, it has a bigger intention. It's actually, you're leveling out that whole mindset. It's not just me and others. We're all the same, and we see that we're all equal. And that's unique to the Mahayana. And of course, the intention of this is to benefit all beings without any kind of bias. But now we see that we're the same. And so we have this 9 points meditation, different aspects that we look at and ideas that we look at that help us to try to develop this inner experience of this kind of equanimity. And so we'll go through these 9 points, which are actually reasonings in a way. And so the first 6 are more conventional, and the last 3 are more on the ultimate level. So first we'll start with the first 3 points, and these are, we're looking at matters from our own viewpoint now. And so the first point is seeing the kindness of others. And so this is the recognition that every being in all of the various lifetimes have been kind to us, immeasurably kind, and have undergone hardships that have and faced various kinds of problems for our benefit. It doesn't have to do with their intention. It has to do with our benefit. So it's from our viewpoint. So people do things all the time that we receive benefit from. And so you could easily say things like, well, I paid for this. It's, I did the work here. But if you think about it, when you were born, you were penniless. You didn't have money. You had like nothing. So that money came from somewhere. Even to have a job, that comes from somewhere. State jobs are very much like that. It's easy to see there. Now, especially now that the funding is going down. So even a state job is a great example. Your funding for your position is coming from all the taxpayers. You're not, sometimes you're in a position where you're generating income, but many times you're not. And so, the taxpayers don't even know you, but you are benefiting from them. So it's not from their side, it's from our viewpoint. So in a sense, you have to recognize, we have to recognize that we were given this work. We were given everything that we have. Everything we have is from the kindness of others. There's nothing that you can find that's that doesn't meet that. And so the second point in this is that others' help is greater than their harm. But our mind goes, but they've harmed me sometimes. But then if you check up and you just look at your own experience, both looking at directly and indirectly how people help you, it's so easy to see. Because you look at just the basic things of living, the food that you eat, the dinner that we had tonight. Someone grew the food. They didn't know us, but we benefited from them. Someone processed it, someone packaged it, transported it, prepared it. You can do every item, the house you live in, the clothes you wear, everything. The books you read, the education you have. So even though sometimes people harm us, if you just look at everything that's going on in your day, just, every hour, all the things you use, the skills you have, you know, it's countless the amount of people that have actually helped us to do things. So these are items that we first try to understand intellectually, but then there's the point where, you know, so you listen to the teachings, then you have to contemplate them, and you have to actually go through some of the reasonings and convince yourself of these things. So the purpose of these points is not to just listen to them now, but actually to then later reflect on them and bring up a experience within yourself of a feeling of certainty of these various points. And so you can do this even when you're walking around, you know, all the various activities in the day, the road you're driving on, the car you're in. I mean, it's just countless things. But putting your mind that direction is quite helpful to spend some time to come to these conclusions, the experience of these conclusions, trying to get to a heartfelt recognition that, yes, this is the case, which is kind of not really where our mind usually is. I mean, it's so easy to dwell on negative thoughts. So someone says something that's kind of unkind to you, and then if you watch your day, how much of your day does that affect? If we actually had realization of this point, we wouldn't be spending hardly any time with that thought. It would just kind of go in one ear and out the other, so to speak. Because if we had this realization in our mind stream, we would see all the things that we're interacting with as kindness. So you can intellectually understand this point very easily, but in order to actually, if you actually look at your own experience throughout the day, you can, you know, how many of us have this as a realization? So it's just a matter of, you know, familiarization, just again and again and again, watching those negative mind states come up, watching how much time of our lives, our precious human lives, gets frittered away with that, and just bringing our mind back to a virtuous thought with these reasonings that are really easy to see. So then the third point under this is that there are a few cases when we're harmed, but seeking revenge is self-defeating. So just think about what you know, look at your own experience, the times where you have had those thoughts and words come out and various actions that trying to seek revenge. What did you really get out of it? So Geshe Tekchok says, which I thought was very well put, since death is definite and the time of death is indefinite, wanting to harm others makes no sense. It's like the squabbling of prisoners condemned to death. That's quite putting it to the point, you know, putting it in a context, putting our lives into the context, bringing to mind, you know, there is no certainty when we're going to die. So if you waste one moment in revenge, you might die. You just don't know. It happens so quickly. About a week ago, I woke up with chest pain, which I'd never had before. It was quite a good experience, because I was like, wow, this is how quickly you can go. You know, because I've known people who have died in their sleep or in their homes from heart attacks, who were, you know, people I worked with, you know, a nurse I knew just didn't wake up. She was on her couch. They found her. And a soccer coach I worked with who was like 49 and died in his sleep from a heart attack. And when that chest pain was happening, I was like, oh, this can happen this quickly. And it was quite a good experience in that regard. And so, you know, thinking about this crazy little things that happen with others, and yeah, okay, if you're feeling harm from someone, what are you going to get out of revenge? You know, it would probably give you a heart attack. You know, that would be a real bonus, you know. You know, so, you know, I mean, these reasonings are, I mean, they're just so, you don't have to study this too long, they're right in your face. It's the realization side of it that we have to remember them when the situations are happening. We have to like take hold of this just sneaky, strong, crazy, self-centered mind that just completely like colors and overshadows everything, and bring these thoughts in. And for me personally, in order for that to happen, I have to try to get my mind very calm, and that allows me to have the space for this to happen. So, because these are actually like antidotes for situations, but for antidotes to work, you can't have your mind too wired and churning and things. So you have to have some attention to your conducive circumstances. You know, you have to put yourself in conditions that you can actually calm your mind enough to make these ideas work. You can't just be really angry at somebody and, you know, say this word to yourself, and you have to cultivate these things over time, and then calm yourself enough to bring them in to gear. And then also on the meditation cushion, bring up situations and use these, to apply them to them, to help to reverse the attitudes and the thoughts, to dispel them. So that's kind of the looking at things from our viewpoint, working on equanimity. And then there's looking at things from the viewpoint of others. So the first point on this is that all sentient beings are equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So examine that. Is that really the case? Can you think of any being it doesn't apply to? I mean, look at earthworms. They're just so sensitive to water, and too much water, too little water. I just have that image so strongly sometimes that we're just like earthworms, you know. We're like, got to be just right this way, that way. You know, we don't want to suffer even a little, and we want just even every little bit of happiness. We're just moving around like earthworms. This is too wet, too dry. You know. That was one of my realizations. Earthworm meditation. So even this thought, you want to use this with not just earthworms, you want to use it, it's true for friends, it's true for enemies, it's true for strangers. You can level things out in that way as well. This is the to me, this reason is just so strong. It's like of course, we go through the day and we have our reactions to people, and they're jumping around like Mexican jumping beings. You know, they're a friend one moment and they're an enemy the next moment, with these small little things that happen. But there's no way you can deny that everyone is equally important in this regard. And that's a huge reasoning to bring in. It really can help to cut some of these kind of, anger, you know. Okay, so now the next point. Given that that everyone is equal in their wish to be happy, it's inappropriate to have a mind that has partiality, to want to help some more than others, basically. And so the second and third points are actually examples that support the very first point. So they give the example of this meditation that we do in the Lam Rim about 10 beggars. And they're all hungry and thirsty, and they come to your door. What would be any kind of logical basis that one would be more important than the other? How could you discriminate one from the other? Even if you didn't like the smell of one compared to the other, or the looks, or you had like a feeling of affection for one. They're all hungry, they're all thirsty. There's no way to have that be appropriate. But even the next point I find even stronger, which is that imagine yourself being like a healthcare provider, like a nurse or a doctor in a hospital, and there's like 10 patients there. And some of them are going to give you a hard time because they're just suffering and in a bad way. Lots of times when people are in the hospital, they're not at their best. They're usually not doing well, you know. And like when my grandma was in the hospital, I mean, she was like another person. She didn't even know where she was, you know. And then other people you're just really going to connect with. You're going to think they're just great, and some you're just going to feel kind of indifferent towards maybe. But are you just going to care for them differently based on that? You know, like, oh, we'll give you your medicine, but I don't like you, so, you know, we'll just pass your room, you know. You weren't nice to me today, so I'm going to the next room. You know, to me, that's such a salient example, because I've been around hospitals and I've had a lot of experience with people peeing on you. I mean, you're just going to say, well, I didn't like that. I'm going to go now, you know. I mean, you know, that just doesn't work. So that's so easy to see. We need to try to cultivate this attitude with everyone that we meet, regardless. This attitude where we want to help everyone equally, because they equally want to be happy. They equally don't want to suffer. So this is really an internal attitude that we're working on here. It's actually not, you know, practical that we can equally help all beings. We have different connections with different people. We have different resources and all, you know, different kinds of ways that we relate to people. So there are some people that we can help directly. There are some people, you know, with our words and our actions. So there are some people that we can't. And for me, that's been like one of my really troubling areas in this particular life is people, you know, having that people I really am attached to, really care for. Some, I'm pretty sure I'm attached, and not being able to help them. And then the distress I've gone into around that. That is actually not compassion. That is moving from there, you know, there's a lot of attachment and a lot of self-concern there, because compassion and personal distress are like not the same thing. So that, I think, for me, comes from the recognition that, practically speaking, I cannot help these people. And so I get frustrated about that, and I fall into personal distress. Where this recognition that keeps my mind more clear is so helpful. Like, I can discern the two. You know, when I see myself start moving to this space of personal distress, I just can bring myself back and say, no, I really want to help this person, but there's nothing I can do. And so I try to stay with I want to help this person. And you can always make prayers for people, and they appreciate it. People that in my life that I can do nothing for actually quite appreciate prayers, even when they're angry at you. So that's what that is. Okay, so that's pretty much from the perspective of others, from the viewpoint of others, how things affect them, and how we can work our minds in relationship to that. And then there's the ultimate level, which is a little harder for me to explain. So basically, this is where they use, the first point is that I kind of took the words and called it the realistic view of the Buddha, is the first point. He doesn't see inherently good and inherently bad people or sentient beings. So it's this realistic view. So when you do the meditation on, from the 7-point cause and effect, the meditation on friend, enemy, and stranger, it's so apparent that how we discriminate friend, enemy, and stranger is based on how they relate to me. It's always, when you do that meditation, it's always about me and me and me. You know, you pick a friend. I always pick a few people. I like that person. That person's always nice to me. Then I pick another person who I'm currently having trouble with. I don't like that person. They did something to me. And then I pick somebody I don't know very well, like, you know, somebody working in a post office or driving. I saw driving down a road, and like, I'm indifferent. They didn't help me or hurt me. And so it's just so clear that we're discriminating it based on that. And then you watch them jump all over the place, you know. People you were in relationships with, now you're complete strangers, and before you knew them you were strangers, and then when you were first together you thought you were friends, and then you turn into enemies. Now you're back to strangers again, you know. And, you know, those things are just, you know, not realistic. So this attachment to people who help us, even just a little, they're the good ones, we like them. And then aversion to people, they harm us even just a little. Now they're difficult, you know. In an hour they're friends again, you know. Today they give me $1,000, so they're my friend. Tomorrow they hit me, whereas yesterday the one hit me. Today they give me $1,000. We're just like, run, run, run. I always call it the Mexican jumping beans, because they're like all over the place. I mean, it's just so, everyone can see that so easily. But it's a little bit more than that, you know. Like for us, these are what happens on my level of practice is this creates negative states of mind, and I have negative thinking that then colors things, and then the person doesn't have to say or do anything, and you've already got the whole, you know, really, I think of it as what's that word, preconception. Yeah, you know, it's preconception, because you actually aren't even thinking about it very consciously, but you already got them completely labeled. You know, to me, this is the whole thing about proliferation or namtok, is the negative thinking that just proliferates. And lots of times in my mind, like in our last retreat, I realized, oh, this runs kind of like a dishwasher in the background, you know. And so I've focused on this negative thinking a lot, because I recognize that it's just kind of there a lot more than I would ever want it to be, which is what happens when you do retreats and things. It drives you crazy. Your afflictions drive you crazy. But that's how you learn how to work with them. So then just realizing that these negative thoughts are related to anger. And anger is 90% projection. So how realistic is that? You know? I mean, even I don't have to be a Buddha. The Buddha doesn't see anything like this, but even from my own experience, I can see that, you know, because then when I have clarity, like things that I was really attached to, and then when my mind is clear, it's like, I don't care, I don't really want that. But when I'm into it, I really want it. And when I'm angry at someone, it's just so real, and then when it's gone, sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and everything will be so peaceful, and it's like, I look for the anger then, and it's like nowhere to be found. It's such a good thing, because it lets me know that there's a really clear place where all of this namtok, all of this proliferating thoughts, they're just thoughts. They're just thoughts. And we believe them, and we act on them, and, you know. So that's where I work with it at. And I see how that thinking steals my happiness. So this is why this thing, love, compassion, and joy, I find so helpful, because I've seen those negative thoughts and how, you know, much they can kind of be this undercurrent and set things up even before the person is they're walking into the room. It's already all set up. It's like the whole veil is painted there. You know, it's like you're looking through this film. It's like all right there. All they do is walk into the room. The whole thing is colored already. And so I think that realizing that, and then realizing I don't know much about love, you know, but I realize it as, you know, this is a place I want to go to, and that recognizing the benefit of it and using that as an aspiration and appreciation, those things can drive you so that you can just come back to those thoughts, but you have to do this for a while. So, but how does the Buddha do it? Well, he's got an easier time. He has clear-sighted wisdom. So then they tell the story of the one person's on one side of the Buddha, and they're like massaging them with this beautiful oil. On the other side, somebody's hacking them with a knife. And in the Buddha's mind, there's not inherently good, not inherently bad. They just do not exist. They do not exist. So how is that? This brings us to the second point. Appearances of good and bad are dependent arisings. We see these things as so inherently existent. That person is bad. It's not like their behavior or how they were, all the conditions, We have this verse from Shanti Deva, such are their conditions, that is so powerful when you see somebody doing something that you don't agree with, or even yourself, such are the conditions. It's causes and conditions. That's why we have these appearances. So appearances of good and bad are dependent arisings. It's not how they actually exist. They just appear that way. So appearances of good and bad come from a little bit of help and a little bit of harm when it comes to friends and difficult people. It's just that much, and they're very, very changeable. That right there tells you that they're not inherently existent, because they're changing all the time. They're not permanent. They're not fixed. From their own side, we've already kind of talked about that. We discriminate the friend, enemy, and stranger from our side. It's not from their side. We just see it that way. And then the third point is that these things are relative and changeable. This one is, I think, the hardest one to really, it's not that hard to understand, but it's really hard to have a feeling for, I think. An actual deep feeling of this. If you had this, you would be like so far along the path. So the way it's taught is that we were kind of labeling, this is my friend, this person is the enemy, this person is the friend. And we see them as like permanent, they're always that way. But these things are relative to each other. And so they use the idea of this mountain and that mountain. This mountain and that mountain. This mountain, why do we call it this mountain? Because it's right here. And that one is over there. But if you switched your place, it would all be reversed. So they're just relative to each other. But the realization of that is, I can only really say it in words because I don't have the realization of that. I do have a slight appreciation, though, of where that realization would take you. Because there would be no way to do the discrimination, because you would be seeing, like, I would want to say the totality, but it's really the dependent arising. You would just see the interrelatedness that's happening. And you couldn't, when something happened with someone, like I know this story once of this guy's on a bus with his children, and the children are like really misbehaving. They're just being wild. And the woman is like getting quite angry with the father, like, why aren't you taking care of these kids? Kind of easy to see how that would happen. But it's a dependent arising. What are his causes and conditions? He's actually coming home from his wife's funeral. So once you know that piece, your whole attitude about the man changes. You see that, well, there's a reason why he's not kind of so tuned in and the kids are going crazy. And so that story has always stuck with me for this, because it helps to show how related and interrelated these things are. That works a little easier for me to see than the mountain one, but it's the same thing. So, where are we here? Okay, so that was point 3, that the friend, that they're not inherently a friend, not inherently this. So that means if they're not inherently a friend, they're not actually worthy of attachment. And they're not inherently disagreeable, so that not inherently worthy of aversion. We just are doing that. So in this whole section, this third part here, this view, we have to come to the conclusion that friend and enemy do not inherently exist. They don't exist from their own side that way. If they did, the Buddha would see it, and he doesn't. They're not permanent. That was more the second point, because they're changing. And the third is that they're not absolute categories. They're designations. They're relative. So that contemplating these 9 points that we just went through helps us to come to a place where we've kind of leveled out all of our conceptions. It's like you can't, when you have these realizations, the self and other will be like on equal footing. There will be no one who's more important. In fact, if you keep going, you're going to find probably the others are more important. So now we get to, this leads us to the meditation on equalizing and exchanging self for others. So here, what do they mean by the word equal? And what do they mean by exchanging? Equalizing and exchanging. So the equal, in one sense, you can say that we're equal in that, you know, I and you, we're all transient. We're all empty of inherent existence. We all have selflessness, those aspects, you know. But that's not what they're talking about here at all. This kind of equal is the equal in the sense of we all want to be happy. We all have the wish to be happy. And we all have the wish not to suffer. This is the meaning. And so if you just think about it in terms of your own body, one example they give is that our body, we cherish all the parts. You don't really want to lose any of them. It's kind of clear. And so in the same way, we need to cherish all sentient beings. And why is that? That's where my mind went, like, why? What comes up in your mind? Why? Why do we need them? So we need them to get ourselves to the path, we need them on the path, and we need them when we get to the end of the path. Everything we have is due to the kindness of others. If we didn't have others, we wouldn't even be able to get to the path. We wouldn't even be alive. So we have to really recognize the kindness of others, that everyone has been helpful to us, and this is where we have to come back to that. Something that's not that hard to see, it might be hard to remember in the moment. The reasonings here are easy to see, but then I don't know that much about this, but I do understand enough that, like Venerable was teaching on a couple of weeks ago, every single one of the perfections is in relationship to others. We can't, you know, we're just so interwoven in that way. And then the meaning of exchanging is not that I become you and you become me. It's not that. It's actually who is important. Was that one video they made? Was that one? What about me? Yeah, what about me? What about me? What about me? What about me? That's our mantra. And it's supposed to go, what about you? And so, we're trying to actually decrease this feeling that we are so important and shift that to others, see the importance of others, increasing that, cultivating that. And actually what we're doing now is we pretty much find it pretty easy to neglect others. And that's when the self-concern is running high, thoughts of all about me, everyone else kind of drops into, I don't know, decimal point of importance. They're kind of out of the picture. We're like, gymnastics. That's a 10, and they're like a point 0.000 something. And so this is what we're trying to change. And actually there is that one way of doing that I kind of like, because you always say like, I'm so hungry, and I want to eat this. And then you just say I, and you think of everybody else when you say I, like I'm hungry. And then you look at Kevin and you say, I'm hungry. Look at John Pell, I'm hungry. Or, I want to be happy. And then I want to be happy, I want to be happy. This is, all these, there's so many ways that we try to learn to work with this, but that's the meaning of it. And why do we do this? One of the ways to look at it is just like, well, there's one of me and there's 6.5 billion humans and countless other creatures. I mean, just the perspective by numbers is daunting. And then you know, look at your own experience. If you don't really care for others, you'll then do negative actions. And when you do negative actions, you're miserable. I mean, this is why Venerable teaches us so much about the self-centered thought, so that we can recognize it, then we can see what our actions, our attitude and actions, you know, what flows out of that, and then what wonderful results we get. You know, like you're suffering. It's so clear. And then the other reason to exchange is because if we care for others, and just think about times, you know, when, you know, being considerate, when you have a feeling of consideration for others, and holding them is important, then we see the results. Other people are happy and they treat us nicer, and we're happier in our own mind. But even if you look at from what happens on their side, you can see the benefit in it. So, you know, this having a kind of integrity and integrity for our own spiritual path, and this consideration for others. That's kind of the reverse of self-centeredness, is consideration for others. I think for me that's the easiest one to go to. And it's just because, you know, I don't like to suffer. I know they don't, other people then also don't. So this is the meaning of exchanging. It's who is important, and we try to cultivate these things. So this kind of equanimity that we've been looking at here leads us to 5 decisions. And the first is that there is no reason to discriminate between sentient beings, the whole friend, enemy, stranger thing that we went through. And more than that, there's no reason to discriminate self from other. That's based on, I took a lot of this from Geshe Tekchok's book, Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage, from chapter 11. And in this 5 reasons that we're going through, he quotes for each reason one verse from Lama Chopa. And so I'll quote one for each verse, because we do that practice here every 2 weeks. So when we're doing that practice, you can, you know, kind of, this brings us to mind that we're trying to cultivate these. There's no difference between myself and others. None of us wishes even the slightest suffering, nor is ever content with the happiness we have. Realizing this, I seek your inspiration to enhance the bliss and joy of others. And then I found this, you know, this is the way we want to go. So whatever other people do, this is now Geshe Tekchok speaking, whatever they do, however they might harm me, I will not retaliate. I will not be biased, you know, falling towards attachment and aversion. I will help them all. That's really because we see there's no reason to discriminate. And of course we're going to take care of our own body, like we take care of our body parts. We're going to take care of everyone. The reasoning is just so solid. This part I find like the best of all of this. Is like, yeah, of course. How could it be any other way? So when the mind is clear, it's just so easy. Of course. How could it be any other way? Then the second point, a decision that we make, is that self-preoccupation is the real enemy. In the verse from Lama Chopa is, this chronic disease of self-centeredness is the cause of all of our unwanted suffering. Perceiving this, I seek your inspiration to blame, begrudge, and destroy the monstrous demon of selfishness. This is our chronic disease from beginningless time. So where we always want to look outside for our happiness, we also always are looking outside for the causes of our unhappiness. And so we find the enemies outside, but that isn't the deal. That isn't going to work. Once we get clear on this point, everything can shift. Because you won't be blaming people anymore. And then you have to not blame yourself. You got to then separate out who I am from these attitudes, these thoughts, which is somewhat challenging, I think. Okay, and then the third decision that we come to is seeing the attitude of cherishing others as being rich in qualities, and so we want to develop it. So we generate this inspiration, you know. This attitude has so many qualities to it, so many benefits. And so we have this like aspiration and energy. We have faith, we have energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. You know, just all those things can come in there. And that's how you progress. Faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So just apply that teaching. That's how the Buddha did it. He used those were his tools. Every teacher he went, before he, you know, when he went to these teachers and then kind of decided not to follow them, he entered his relationship with each of those teachers and the teachings. He went into it with faith, with energy, with mindfulness, with concentration and wisdom, and so he got the results. And so it's the same with any of these things that we want to cultivate. Those are like the getting out your toolbox. You need all of them. Okay, so the verse from that one, so this third point, is the attitude that cherishes all other sentient beings and would secure them in bliss is the source from which arise boundless virtuous qualities. Seeing this, I seek your inspiration to cherish these beings more than my life, even should they all rise up as my enemies. Boundless virtuous qualities. Okay, and then the fourth point is seeing the faults of self-centeredness and the benefits of cherishing others. And by seeing that, then we decide that we want to exchange self and others. Who's important? We come to this decision. We want to make this exchange. So the verse is, in brief, infantile beings labor only for their own ends, while Buddhas work solely for the welfare of others, discerning the advantages of one and the disadvantages of the other. I seek your inspiration to be able to equalize and exchange self and others. So this is kind of where all of this leads to, is this, you know, the teachings that follow here go into much more in terms of the advantages of cherishing others and the disadvantages of all this self-preoccupation, which with much more detail. But the reasonings that we've come to lead us to this. So then the fifth point is that we meditate over and over on these disadvantages of self-preoccupation and the advantages of cherishing others. And so from doing that over and over, we come to a place where our decision is such that we really want to like devote ourselves to this practice, seeing this as an essential practice. Exchanging self and others. Who is important? Having consideration for others. Why? Because they're important. So in the verses, since cherishing ourselves is the doorway to all torment, while cherishing our mothers is the foundation of all that is good, inspire me to make my core practice the yoga of exchanging self for others. So that, I think, is like coming to a place of both clarity on the points, but then a resolve based on that. And we'll put some energy into it then. And since, you know, the self-centered thought is like not going away, we have lots of opportunity. Not going away readily. It's got a lot of habituation. So then what we've then come to at this point is, in summary, is that we've gone through these 9 various reasons for developing this kind of equanimity that levels self and other. And then we come to this place where we're going to contemplate these decisions And when we do this with those verses, we're always requesting this inspiration from the teachers and from the three jewels. But the actual meditation is actually doing the exchange, equalizing and exchanging. And so in order to do that, in order to cultivate this intention that we want to benefit others, we have to see others as pleasing. We have to see them in a positive light. So this is where the heartwarming love that we were talking about comes in. It sees others as pleasing. We have to have a positive attitude towards others. And this is how we get there. And so then from here, what happens is, just kind of to back up a little bit, we worked on, we spent time with the 7-point cause and effect. And there we were trying to generate this intention to want to be a benefit to others, becoming enlightened to benefit others, the altruistic intention. And we got to this point of getting to this heartwarming love by going through a different kind of equanimity, seeing others as our mothers, seeing their kindness and wanting to repay their kindness. And then in this method, we're trying to come to a similar place. We're trying to come to this place of heartwarming love. And the method here is by seeing the faults of our self-centered thought and seeing the advantages of cherishing others. And then by doing that, by seeing our self-centeredness, we find out who the real enemy is. And then we just make a determination. We're not going to follow that. It just leads to misery for myself and others. And then we go to the place of seeing, why is this so beneficial to switch who's important? And that leads to this like eagerness. We see the advantages, and that leads to an eagerness and an effort. So then in the method that we discussed tonight, then you would go on to the giving and taking meditation, and then the 7-point cause and effect one, which we've worked on before. This is now review. We would work then on cultivating compassion and love and the great resolve. And so this is how we're going to get there. And does anyone have any questions or comments? Good, because we don't have much time.
I do appreciate something that's kind of been dawning on me over the last while, but I used to always think that cultivating bodhicitta was sort of an emotional thing.
Yeah.
And the power of the reasonings, making it stable, and the way you just articulated it was so clear. It's a totally different thing.
I got to that with the one point in there. I was like, wow, this is true. This is really true. I cannot deny this. You know, I always found that one, when you're in the hospital with the 10 patients, I found that particularly because I had been in hospitals a lot. I was like, can you even imagine doing that? No, I can't even imagine doing that. So then when you take it to the point of, you know, just going through the reasoning of like, you know, Shantideva has it, you know, this thing with the body parts. He goes into that, you know, in the book. But it's really kind of hard to get there, you know, like, why are you guys so important? You know, but the reasoning is like infallible. And so it's like, why, of course, you know, so I have to spend more time with it. But there is, you know, I was just like, wow, you really can't deny that, you know, like, how are you going to get outside of that one? When your mind is clear, you're not going to get outside of that one. And that, you know, so yeah, that's, I think, the kind of trying to have the combination, you know, I think you need to have the emotional component, but if I just follow my emotions, I'll probably land into where it's gone in the past. Because I have a lot of habituation to like the compassion going to personal distress, and I don't know about love. I don't even try. What is that? So that's why for me I use the words consideration for others, because that's very clear in my mind. When I use the words, we were talking about this some time ago, you know, loving others, I have a difficult time sometimes separating out my attachment. And so I actually use different words. But yeah. Yeah, it's a thing of like, the reasonings are like, to me, they're like, kind of like a matrix, you know, like a, I don't know how to call that. They're like a pattern, but now you've got to put some content into it. You've got to put your life experience into it. or else it's just like, books, words. Won't change the mind. So that means next time we're growling at each other, I'm going to hear about it, which will be a pleasure. But give me about 8 seconds for my reactivity to settle, my habituations.